Hi, everyone, and welcome to our session on profiling, healthy profile management. My name is Christine Neal, and I'm an education and lifeline consultant here at Blue Ridge, and I'm really excited to spend some time with you today to talk about seasonality, those seasonal items, and some of the different ways you can manage those seasonal profiles in the system. And so during our session, we're going to cover several different areas. We're going to start with just level setting. So why do you even need to consider profiles for your items? Just what's the whole point with profiles anyway? Then we'll touch on some of the benefits you'll experience when you've got appropriate profiles assigned to your items. Next, we'll talk about the different ways you can manage those profiles in your Blue Ridge system, right? You've got options, and options are definitely a good thing, trust me. After we touch on those different options, we'll go into some high-level how-tos. So show you where the functions live, how to get there, and how to use these different functions within your system. And finally, we'll wrap up with just a couple of callouts, some things you'll want to avoid and keep in mind as you're managing seasonality in your system. Sound good? All right, well, let's go ahead and jump right in. We'll get started. So when we talk about seasonality, what does that really mean? And to give you a formal definition, seasonality is referring to an item whose demand history is not flat, right? It's not smooth when you look back across all of that history. And it's also one that has peaks and valleys during the same time year over year. Probably my favorite example from my past is managing air filters. And we sold them year round, but we saw these massive peaks every fall and every spring. So we would just see this big mountain of demand coming in those 2 times every year. And I'll say we're probably all impacted by seasonality, whether you're trying to manage those item level profiles or whether you're a consumer of seasonal items. Think about the holidays and maybe times in the past when you had to run to 2 or 3 different grocery stores just to grab that last 1 or 2 items you needed for a holiday party, a family dinner. Back to school is another great example. Toward the end of the summer, I'd always see parents and kids with their printed out supply lists, right? And they're just scouring the stores for those notebooks, those pens, backpacks, all those things that they need in order to start the school year off. And so this slide illustrates what happens with your forecast in the system when you don't have a profile applied. And we also show you what happens with your forecast when there is an appropriate profile applied. So let's start with this red line first. Again, this is representing when there is not a profile on your item. Your Blue Ridge system is always responding to actual demand, right? You have that demand forecast, and we're also looking at what's really going on with your items. Without a profile, you can see that the system will always be a little bit behind the curve. We're going to lag just a little bit. Your system is not built to overreact, and as each period lapses, you can see that the system will update that future demand forecast, but from a more conservative standpoint. As we follow this red line on up through peak and then past that peak and then coming out of season, we can see we're missing some sales as we're heading up into that peak season. And then possibly we'll be ending that season a little bit heavy, right? We are reacting and responding always to the actual demand that's coming in, and we will help you slow ordering after the season, but it may just not be quick enough, right? We're not scaling those orders back as quickly as you would probably like to. And then now the yellow line. This line describes what your forecast will look like when there is an appropriate profile assigned to the item. The demand forecast is more in line with those sales, with the actuals you're experiencing. And some benefits here include helping you build up that inventory at the appropriate time as you're heading into season and reaching that peak. And then as soon as we reach that peak, since we're always looking forward, we're going to start pulling back on the orders that we're recommending for you. So we're going to help you end that season without as many overstocks. And we really don't like out of stocks or overstocks. And when you end the season heavy on inventory, it's tying up dollars that you really need to spend elsewhere. And so reiterating some of these benefits with that appropriate profile applied to an item, you're going to see your inventory and sales are much more aligned. You're going to be building inventory as you're heading into season to help you grab those increased sales that you're experiencing as you're getting on up to that peak. And you'll be ending the season with less overstocks. Hopefully no overstocks, right? In a perfect world, we would have no overstocks at the end of a season. And I can say we can only dream for that to happen. But the overall inventory you'll be carrying will be much more sensible based upon the demand that you are expecting to happen. And also, I'm sure we all work our demand exceptions on that frequent period end basis. We love that the system tells us when something unusual happens with our demand. It makes it really easy for us to review and address those peculiar things that happen. And with the right profile applied to your items, you can expect to see less demand exceptions, and the forecast will be more consistent with your sales. When we think about everything we're managing on a daily or a monthly basis, it's nice to think about less demand exceptions. Since you've given the system a better heads up so it knows what to expect, that way you'll be able to continue focusing on the exceptions when something truly unexpected happens with your demand. Now for the options. This is where it starts to get fun. So there's several ways to manage profiles in your Blue Ridge system. We'll first touch on these higher level, and then we'll go into a little bit more detail of each. So first is your advanced seasonality process. Think of this as a mass approach. Your system is going to analyze a group of items all at once to determine if there are seasonal patterns, and then your system is going to suggest profiles for those seasonal items. It's a really great first swoop at helping ID those seasonal patterns in your demand history. And I can't say it's a catch-all, but it's a really great starting point, really, to just help you get started with all of the profiling that you need to get done and all of those profiles you need added to your items. Second, you can add and remove profiles from your item forecast screen. And although advanced seasonality is a really big time saver, there might be items out there that don't meet the criteria your advanced seasonality process is looking for. So you may need to think about adding profiles on an individual item basis. And third, there's the Profile Manager screen. So for those of you who like to calculate your own indices, your own demand pattern outside the system in Excel, for example, you can come in and input those indices, or you can use one-to-many items to create a profile and then apply that profile to one-to-many items. I think these are some pretty good options, right? We like more than one, and there's definitely some flexibility within your system as with regards to profiling. So let's take a closer look at each of these options. So advanced seasonality, the time saver. And this is accessed under the Advanced Tasks tab of your system. When you run this process, it's looking at a grouping of items, right? And you can filter by supplier, by location, by activity code. The filter options go on. And we'll talk about the process steps over the next couple of slides. Just what is this process that the system is going through? You have the option to run the process immediately, or you can set this on a schedule. And when you set up a schedule on that specific day and time, once that day and time arrives, the process is going to kick off immediately. You're not going to have to remember to come back into the system on that day and time and get that process started running. And once it does run, right after it kicks off immediately based upon the schedule you've set, you'll be alerted on your dashboard when there are new profiles recommended for your items. So we'll call that out for you. You don't have to write down a post-it for yourself or set a reminder on your calendar. We're gonna go ahead and run the process based upon when you've told us to run it, and then call out to you those items where we are suggesting that you go ahead and add profiles. And then also when running this process, when running the advanced seasonality process, you can have the system automatically apply profiles to your items, or you can opt to review those profiles first before accepting and applying them to your items. And my best practice to you is when you first start running this process, I recommend you don't automatically apply the profiles. It's best to spend some time looking at the results, asking questions, right, if those results don't make sense, really becoming more comfortable with the results before you have the system automatically doing anything. All right, so now let's talk about the steps of the advanced seasonality process, and just stick with me here. So the first and second step your Blue Ridge system will go through. First, we're going to analyze your demand history, right? And these are the common demand history patterns you're going to see within all of that historical demand you've got in your system. And we're going to look at this at the individual item ship point location level to determine what we call the item selling pattern. And this is really just a fancy way to say, is the item even seasonal? Back when we first started the session, I mentioned that a seasonal item has a non-flat demand pattern and peaks and valleys at the same time year over year. Think about those air filters I mentioned. We sold them year round, but we saw massive mountains every fall and every spring. So again, that first step is the item even seasonal? And for this process to determine if an item is seasonal, we do need at least 2 years of demand history. And then for items that are ID'd as seasonal, your system is going to calculate what is called a pattern match score. This is another fancy term, and really what it's describing is for those items that are identified as seasonal, how closely do those year over year patterns line up? How closely do they match? The higher this percent, the more alignment there is with those year over year peaks. And then the third step, so once the system identifies those seasonal items and calculates that pattern match score, what it's going to do is develop a profile and then lay that profile over top of that demand history to determine what is called the seasonal value add. And yep, you guessed it, seasonal value add is another fancy term. And what we're looking for here is how much better would the forecast have been if the profile had been applied to the item. So looking back at the past with this newly developed profile, how much better would things have been with the profile? How much better would the forecast have been? And the higher the seasonal value add, the better the forecast accuracy and also the less demand exceptions you're going to see. After the process completes, you'll be able to check out those results. You're going to see multiple tabs across the screen, and you're going to see selected items, strong, high, medium, and low, non-seasonal, and then not evaluated. Okay, so what do all these tabs mean? Selected items, these are items to be analyzed based upon that filter criteria, right? Maybe you picked a specific supplier, a specific location, a specific activity code. So this represents the entire population of items based upon your filter criteria. And then strong, high, medium, and low. These represent a confidence measure based on how well the profile meets minimum thresholds you defined when you created the advanced seasonality job. And they are also based on some proprietary processing. Non-seasonal, This represents items that did not qualify for a seasonal profile. And then not evaluated, this represents items that were not evaluated due to the selection criteria. And when you're reviewing the results, I just want to throw this out there. You may want to ignore or avoid or kind of stay away from, well, if it's low, you know, that's not very confident. The strong, the highs, there's much more confidence there that the profiles are going to help with that forecast accuracy and help reduce those demand exceptions, just help you order better going forward. But don't discount the lows, right? Even if the profile results in only a slight improvement, it still is an improvement. So don't ignore those. All right, so another way that I mentioned you can add a profile to an item, you can come onto your item forecast screen for a specific item ship point location record. And what you can do is click this Create Seasonal Profile button. And once you click this button, if the item is deemed as a seasonal, what we're going to do is bring you to this results screen. And here you're going to see a few different data points, some helpful data points to help you just understand how good is this profile. A few slides ago, I mentioned that seasonal match score. So again, this is describing how closely do these year-over-year selling patterns match up. The higher this percent, the more closely those patterns match year over year. And then we have, again, our seasonal value add. Once we determine, you know, is it a seasonal item? We're going to go ahead and create that profile, develop a profile for the item based upon the demand history, lay it over top of that historical demand, and the higher the percentage, the higher this seasonal value add, that much better that your forecast is going to be, your forecast accuracy, and you'll see those less demand exceptions. We also call out, what is that confidence level, right? On the slide just before, we saw that there's strong, high, medium, low. And so we're going to call out for you just how confident is your system? How confident are we that this is a good profile for this item, and that by applying this profile, you're going to see improvements. You're going to reap those benefits we touched on earlier in the presentation. And within the graph below, you're also going to be able to see if there is an existing profile on the item. In this example, the existing profile was down here at the bottom, this green line, which means there was no profile on it before. And our yellow dotted line, or our orange dotted line, this represents what does the shape of the demand look like? What does the shape of the profile look like on this item? Another option from the item forecast screen allows you to use an existing profile. So if you click on this magnifying glass icon right here, what it's going to do is present you with this pop-up on the screen that shows you a listing of all of the profiles that exist in your system. And you can scroll through this list and basically use a profile that has been created or is applied to another item and assign it to this item. And this is also how you can remove a profile from an item. So if you've got the profile assigned and you want to remove it from the item, you would click that same magnifying glass icon. And within this pop-up, the first option is no profile. If you click on no profile, that's going to go ahead and remove the profile from your item. So let's just talk about editing the profile and making forecast adjustments really quickly. So within your item forecast screen, you know you've got your charts up top, kind of in the middle of the page, I should say. And then down at the bottom, you have this data grid. The top section represents your future demand forecast, and then the bottom represents your history. And then, of course, over on the left, you have the forecasting functions. You can edit in these boxes, and you also have some helpful functions to help you adjust the forecast. If you need or want to make an adjustment to the profile, so to the curve, the shape of your demand, You'll go ahead and make the update in one of these fields. You'll find the period that you want to go ahead and edit. Whether you're a weekly or a 4-weekly or a monthly system, you'll identify the period of demand where you need to make an adjustment to that period's unique indice. And by making the change here, you're actually going to be changing the shape of the profile on the item. If you need to just make a forecast change, raise that forecast up or lower from a holistic standpoint, what you'll do is use the left-hand side over here. You'll either make an edit in one of these fields, or you'll go ahead and use one of these functions, one of these icons. Again, when you make an edit in one of these fields, you're actually adjusting the shape of that profile that you have on the item in the system. And then Profile Manager is another option where you can create profiles and build profiles within the system. You've got the option to input, right? If you've calculated your own shape, your own curve, your own indices outside of the system, maybe you'd like doing that and you've done it in Excel, you can come into the Profile Manager screen and then input the period level indices into these fields. And if you're a 4-weekly or weekly system, you can do that at a 4-weekly or a weekly level. And then if you're a monthly system, you'll go ahead, you'll have those monthly buckets where you'll be able to input your demand pattern, those indices in these fields. The other option that you have on the Profile Manager screen is actually to build a profile from one to many items, and then you can apply that profile you've created to one to many items. So you've got those two different options available to you in the Profile Manager screen. All right, so now that we've covered the different ways that you can build profiles in the system, how to create them, how to manage them, and where to access those different features and functions, let's just spend a couple of moments on some pitfalls, some things to keep in mind or think about as you're managing these items going forward in the future. So I mentioned this when we were talking about the results that you're going to see when you run that advanced seasonality process. You have those tabs that show you strong, high, medium, and low. And you don't want to ignore items where they just have that slight seasonality, right? Even if it is a small improvement, it's still an improvement. And even with that small improvement, you can help the system help you better align your inventory with your sales, reduce those demand exceptions, improve that overall forecast accuracy that you're seeing in the system. If you are considering using an existing profile that is applied to one item and apply that to another item in the system, you want to make sure that you don't share a profile with an item that doesn't follow the same selling pattern. When we go through our initial training and we talk about profiling and advanced seasonality, one of the call outs is no profile is better than a bad profile. And this comment, this call out, speaks a little bit to that. You don't want a bad profile on an item. It can help you build up your inventory at the wrong time. It can help you pull back on those orders at the wrong time. And what you'll see in those scenarios is you potentially see missed sales as you're heading into season. You may end the season heavy on inventory, or you may just have a complete wrong pattern applied to your item that is completely out of whack, completely out of alignment with how the item actually sells. So you just want to be mindful. If you are using an existing items profile and applying it to another, you just want to make sure that they have similar selling patterns before you go ahead and kind of copy that profile from one item to another. This next point, so There are some holidays throughout the year, some seasons that shift a little bit. Easter is one of them. It doesn't fall at the exact same week of the year or exact same day, the exact same time of year. And that can significantly impact the overall shape, the overall selling pattern of your items. Years ago, I managed floral. When I was working for a grocery chain, I managed the floral inventory in addition to the produce. And we were looking at Mother's Day, we were looking at Easter history from one year to the next to help us determine what kind of lifts do we see in our floral category around Easter. And although we had great uplift information, we had to just be very mindful that Easter this year is falling at a slightly different time than last year. So we had to just be careful about how we built those profiles, how we built up that inventory for that Easter season. And then you also want to make sure that you are removing profiles from items that are no longer seasonal. And if you keep a profile on an item where that seasonal pattern doesn't exist anymore, you're going to be seeing strange things happen from a sales versus inventory standpoint. If you still have that profile on that item, the system is going to try to help you build up inventory as you're heading into the season that potentially no longer exists. And then it's going to try to help you pull back on orders once you reach that peak. So if the item's just not seasonal anymore, you just want to make sure that you are removing profiles at the appropriate times. And ultimately, you just want to make sure that you're buying the right amount at the right time, and then you're pulling back on ordering at the right time. If the demand pattern has changed to be just something a bit more smooth, or we're not seeing those peaks and valleys year over year, there's really no reason for you to have a profile on that item anymore. So you just want to make sure you're not only identifying opportunities to add and apply profiles to the items, as well as adjusting if patterns change. You do want to make sure that you're also removing profiles from items when that seasonal pattern just doesn't exist anymore. So just some things to keep in mind, right, as you're managing those profiles in the future. And well, gang, I really appreciate your time today. I hope you found this session valuable and informative. And if you have any questions about the seasonal profiling, about any of the ways to manage profiles we talked about today, if you're curious on how to read any of the results that you're seeing in the system, or just how to access some of the different features or functions, please reach out to us at br.servicedesk@blueridgeglobal.com. And additionally, if you just want to set up some time to talk about this in a little more detail, I know 30 minutes is quick, so you may have just some burning questions or some things you want to talk about further. Definitely just reach out to us. Again, that's br.servicedesk@blueridgeglobal.com. And I hope everyone has a great rest of the day, and I hope you enjoy the rest of our Blueprint 2020. Thanks, everyone.